something here which I've noted down, which in a commissioned study into public spaces for use by Kay, the study frequently brought up issues that underscored the positive value of well-designed public space, but highlighted that the design process needs greater engagement with those who may use the spaces, and that the uses and benefits of such spaces needed wider policy recognition. Do you actually think that's something which, when you're saying, I mean, do you think it's something that it is more engagement is needed with the users and sort of cross-platform with users from whoever the skaters? Do you think it's kind of too narrow?
Yeah, I mean, I've done walking tours of the city with people from the skateboard community and the graffiti community, all the kind of, you know, those people that, and remember, one of the slogans we have today is we're designing places for people. The first thing that happens in risk assessment is how do you get rid of the wind-ups, the drug addicts, the dogs, the kids, the skateboarders. I mean, there's a long list that you begin going through. By the time you've done that, you've created a space that in general, spaces in general, that I think can be quite tedious, quite limited in their function, the opportunities that are there for all of us. And they're often very pretty, but very sterile. And I think that the kind of consultation that needs to be done has to get beyond the style of consultation we're doing and get down to some real, you know, real ideas of engagement about not what we're building, but how we're going to make a place that allows people to create the identity of that site. And you know, if the site ends up being turned over to the skateboarders, more power to them. If the site becomes a place where artists feel they can act out, you know, their own initiatives, more power to them. If it's, you know, the garden club, it's the garden club. You know, but I think it really is setting up the platform so people engage with those spaces.
What you're saying that kind of leads into the fourth question, which is what are or should be the major factors concerning the planning, design, and rejuvenation of public spaces? What influence or engagement does the public have in this process? I mean, you're saying about kind of, you know, giving more power to those people, but how does that happen?
Well,
how are they engaged?
The city goes through fairly long processes of consultation. I just think that some of the models we're using are probably fairly dated, and some of the groups that are most vocal are not going to be actually considering the cultural aspects of place. They're not even thinking about you know, how you create a place. You know, so somebody will say to me about public art, I'll say, what do you want? And they say planters, benches, and a mining wheel. And I say no. You know, I can't say yes. I mean, my job is to get contemporary art into these places, contemporary design, and to look at, you know, these places in a system that says it has value to us today. So a lot of our consultation tends towards nostalgia and sentimentality, which really has to be, I think, limited when we're discussing new places for people. Because in a sense, what we're building for are people we haven't met yet. The projects that are on the board today will not be finished until 2012, 2015. So these, you know, even if the first houses begin next year, the extent of projects is quite lengthy. So that's what I mean, in a sense, we build for the future. And in that sense, I think it takes a great deal of generosity to conceive of what that site should be.
Peter, you maybe kind of explain a little bit about, I was just thinking about the rejuvenation of a current space, Old Elgin Square. That was something which in your PhD research, that was one of the spaces that you looked at. I mean, I wonder if you just would say a little bit about the research that you undertook and any kind of conclusions that were drawn.
Saying it, just I'm trying to squeeze 5 years worth of work into about 10 minutes of talking. No, and one of the key things from what I was saying is you've got the idea of use being a driver, and use has got to be a driver for public spaces. And coming out, particularly Old Elgin Square, one of the key things that comes about is the layering of those meanings for different types of people. What the Old Elgin Square is a war memorial for many people. It's considered a sacred site for those that weren't brought back from the war. It's almost like a graveyard for their meaning in some ways. In other ways, it's a public space because it's one of the only open and green spaces in the heart of the city. For others, it's a gathering place for all those young people that go there, but it's also a nexus of the public transport system because you've got a bus station behind, and Blackett Street in front is the main east-west conduit of public transport through the city. But it's also a commercial space, and there's two key commercial tensions. competing there in terms of the local businesses and small businesses in the last remaining side of the Georgian Terrace, but it's also surrounded on 3 sides by the Alton Square shopping centre, where one really is one of the defining qualities of the city centre of Newcastle. So all of those different layers of meaning interact in lots of different ways, and particularly with the consultations around all over the square. There was a very sincere and very driven effort to engage with those people. One of the key problems that came out of that engagement was that the City Council had outsourced the majority of the consultation to other organisations in the form of youth charitable agencies that operate in and around the city centre. The tensions between what those people are considered to be consultation and what the City Council were expecting in terms of consultation, the aims around how that was defined. There's different views depending on who you talk to about what that was, consultation was for. A large part of that was, in a sense, targeted towards, well, how can we provide for these people in a way that's going to move them out of the way of the shoppers that we want to get in there. And the emphasis on regenerating the area to make it a family-friendly public space that was going to also, there was a lot of emphasis put on the fact that it was a sacred space for the ex-servicemen. Now that was intention. When I talked to the ex-servicemen, they specifically said we like the young people being there because that is bringing more knowledge to them about what the War Memorial is there for. They're aware of it, they're being exposed to it, it's good. However, the tack that was taken by other organisations was very much that the ex-servicemen were offended by these young people's desecration of this space. So there was a tension between the realities of the views that needed to be addressed in a more consultative manner. One of the ways which that was addressed and other areas have sort of fed into the way that consultation could have gone better were brought from things like participatory appraisal that was being operated with graffiti forums and engaging with areas of graffiti that's associated with skate culture. Skate culture's there, we don't have graffiti on the memorial, so we'll find a way through that. And in respect to the graffiti, that worked very, very well. And in respect to the skaters, the generation of the skate park on the north end of the city centre, that worked very, very well in terms of giving these people a space that was their own in which they could perform safe, free of harm and not causing an inconvenience to anyone else. The problem groups in that were particularly the chav kids and the goth kids that gathered there, because the goth kids gather in there from a stereotypically fairly wealthy middle class background and are travelling from the outer suburbs or from outside of Newcastle to meet in that area, whereas the chav kids were from poor inner city neighbourhoods, and they were seen by particularly the police as coming into that area to prey on the goth kids, steal mobile phones, create havoc, basically sort of drawing a little bit of fun out of it. And there's several police reports about incidents where chav kids have brought bags of flour and eggs in, stood aisle and walk over them and thrown them, and it's generated bricks and glass bottles at one point were being thrown at the gatherings of goth kids out in that area in the city centre. So from a social order perspective, that needs to be addressed. From the perspective of the goth kids gathering in numbers, intimidating other people coming into that area, that needs to be addressed. Businesses losing money because of the kids being there and intimidating customers, it's an issue that needs to be addressed. But the fact that the kids are not doing anything wrong, gathering there in numbers in a public space is not a crime. But the fact that the perception of how they were seen and the perception of their activities in that space, that's really where the problem is occurring. And trying to reconcile the public to the fact that these people weren't doing anything wrong was a challenge that I don't think really anyone has a way of addressing. The local media didn't help. The Evening Chronicle certainly didn't help with their headline, "Mob Brawling Blights Historic Square." When I talked to the police about what actually happened that day, 3 goth kids and 3 chav kids got into a row. And people just zoomed on it to pull them all apart. From the idle passerby, that's a riot.
So, do you think, obviously the consultation process was going on at the time you were doing the research?
There were actually 2 different consultation processes happening. One happened where the young people were talked to about what they wanted and where else they would go. One happened with the local residents and the local businesses about what was actually going to be done. And those 2 consultation processes didn't actually interact very much.
So do you think it's actually going to be successful?
I think it's going to be a successful commercial space.